What's going on, everybody? Doc from Average Gamer Guys back yet again. Some more Destiny 2 action, and today doing a walkthrough for the newest Nightfall raid that just updated with the weekly changes that occurred today, or when you're watching this, probably the day previous. So, if you are familiar with the final mission to get your Sturm hand cannon, you will be very familiar with this mission and what you have to do. The flow and the pacing of it runs pretty much the same, but I did want to provide this guide. We are going to zip through a little bit of this just to save you guys some time, but I will definitely talk through the different changes and updates for this as far as the Nightfall raid is concerned. So a couple key things up front. There are no more rings. Rings in the previous Nightfall were what gave you additional time. In this raid, you start with 15 minutes, and we'll talk through how you get the additional time here in a second. Additionally, there is no buff for the different type of weapon energy class that the damage ends up doing. All your damage is going to be normal for whatever you get and for whatever weapons you have based on the enemy and what their weaknesses are. Now right here I'm going to show you how you get the additional 30 seconds. There are different they look like dataless, slightly darker blue, a little bit more solid. They were going to be scattered around the map. You're going to get a little notification in the left hand side of your screen. You can see it up there right now, anomaly detected. All you got to do is shoot them, and that's going to get your 30 seconds. Now these again are scattered throughout, and you do get the notification on the side of the screen to let you know that one is close to you. So just the biggest tip I have for you in that regard is just make sure you're taking a look. You and your team are just scanning the area. Again, some of them are pretty difficult to find. You definitely don't need to get all of them, but especially in this first area, you should be able to pick up just about most of them. The other key critical time to grab them is going to be near the end, right before the boss fight. So this little fight you just saw right here is going to be your first kind of mini boss. Sword works really well on taking that guy down, and really you're just clearing out the fallen and you're just taking care of it, and from here you're just going to continue to move through the mission. Again, a little bit of differences here. You've got some tripwires that you got to move through, and really this mission kind of phases out into a few different portions. That first portion being kind of the first. The next one is going to be, if you're familiar with the mission, where you have to stay and protect Ghost, stay inside the ring while you get pretty flooded with enemies. I'll be honest, this next portion where you have to protect Ghost is honestly, in my opinion, one of the harder portions to finish. The fact that you have to stay inside the ring in order to trigger, it only does have to be only a single person, so that is important to note. But the enemies, they come pretty quick, pretty fast. The explosion on the electrified enemies is actually quite big as well, so that's just something to keep in mind and in consideration when you're working through this. Now protecting of the Ghost really has two stages. Essentially, the first stage is where you're working to help protect him, and you need to get him to 50%. When you get him to 50%, you kind of shift into the second stage of this portion of the raid, or the strike, excuse me, I keep saying raid. And you're going to get 2 servitors to drop in. That's how you know you're at that 50% mark. And really you can focus on those guys. It's a great time to use the super to go ahead and knock that out. Try to take those servitors down just for the sole fact that they do make a lot of the other enemies immune, and that can be pretty difficult. I would say definitely minus the final boss fight through this raid, this is definitely the portion that you'll have probably the most trouble with, and will soak up the most time just based on the fact that you have to keep you and your fire team close in order to stay inside that ring. And there's just a lot of stuff coming real close, real tight in at you, and you really have enemies coming from just about all sides except for behind you. So biggest recommendation here to help with that, keep one person in the ring, the other 2 kind of flank to the sides, and just shift back and forth from reviving each other. That's another big key difference that I forgot to mention at the beginning of this raid, is that you do not recover health. You only recover health from the small white orbs that enemies drop, and that's a very important note, which is going to end up probably causing you to end up at least going down, if not dying more often. So you really got to try to look and conserve your health. We ran 2 Titans and a Hunter class in this. I definitely think that was a good setup. But obviously you can pretty clearly do this with each. I honestly think this is probably a little bit easier strike than the one we had previously, but that's just my personal opinion, having already played this mission. Like I said, if you haven't already, that would give you a great instance for kind of what to do and the pace of it and what you're going to have to come up to next at each portion. So once you finish out that and you finish protecting ghosts, you're going to be able to hop on your vehicle. You're going to be able to speed through that next portion. You're going to have to hit some light gates, which is pretty easy. Grab those. Don't even worry about any of the enemies, and get to this portion here where you're fighting this fallen walker. Now this thing, if you're familiar with playing the public event, you know that these guys can take some pretty brutal damage. I was definitely a big fan of the striker class here with my lightning grenades. The fact that I could throw those down were pretty awesome. I also like this strategy here of popping my mini shield, being able to fire my power weapon, get a lot of good damage in, pop down to get it automatically reloaded. This, I think, was one of the biggest time-saving differences for when I ran through it this time with my fire team, just for the sole fact that we took this down so quickly. There are other enemies in this area which if you give them the time, they will come in and will definitely harass you, but we really knocked this portion out pretty quickly. You can see we're sitting at just under 8 minutes at this point, which I feel like is a very solid time. And if you're familiar with the mission, you're going to know that at this point you're getting pretty close to the end. It's important to note that after protecting Ghost, moving forward all the way through up until right here, that there are no anomalies to detect and to shoot. But once you do jump inside this small blackened little cavern area where you got to hop up, it's important to note that this is where you're going to be able to pick up quite a bit of additional time. So you'll see that we enter it with just under 8 minutes, and we finish with just about 10 minutes or so to go with the final boss fight. I definitely think you can beat the final boss fight in about 7 minutes, so that's a good mark to put on the wall. But ton of data anomalies everywhere, so take the time, clear the enemies out in this area, and do a good sweep. Definitely recommend having one person on the floor look, one person kind of midway through on the platforms, and then one person all the way at the top right before jumping into the boss. Just scan all areas and all circles. Like I said, there's a ton in there for you to pick up, and you can definitely get a good portion of time before heading into the boss. So as you get prepped to head into the boss, you're going to jump down. You're going to have to clear out quite a bit of ads, and more ads than you normally would in the mission. That's important to note as well. That was one of the key differences. And this boss fight, again, not the most terribly difficult boss fight. I don't think he does a ton of damage, but you factor in the additional ads, you factor in kind of the area denial from the electrified enemies that do have a decent amount of health and take a little bit to take down. When you put all those factors together, it can make this boss fight, on top of the fact that you can't regenerate health except for essentially healing drops from enemies. You factor all those in, they can make for a pretty tough boss fight. I will say, being able to pour on damage pretty quickly while also having people focus on some ads was a good amount of success for us. You're going to see me during a large portion of this boss fight actually kind of focus more on the ads than the actual boss, except to get into my super, as well as to drop in some of my power ammo shots. And then obviously anytime I can get any damage in, I would. Having the fact that you have 3 people that can trade off, use your supers early as well. There's enough ads that through the course of the boss fight, because it just generally is longer, you are going to be able to probably regenerate your super after a couple of variations. When you deal this boss enough damage, he is going to essentially disappear for 30 seconds. You'll see another wave of ads come in, and then at a few seconds after those ads come in, he will then come back in cloaked. You can break that cloak, just deal damage to him, or if you have anything that when you take a melee hit does any arc damage, that will disrupt his cloaking as well. So that's how to kind of bring him back. But that's really the pace of how this is going to go. Once you get the boss fight down to about 1/3 of the health, you're going to see him change from a ranged attack, which again really didn't do too much damage in my opinion. You're going to see him change from his ranged attacks to double swords, which is a pretty strong melee and also has a pretty good knockback effect, which can throw you off the map. That's another thing with this map and this boss fight in particular. You have to be very careful about your footing and your placement. Again, you're going to have the area denial from those electrified enemies, which can sometimes be a little bit hard to destroy and get rid of to clear a path for you, but I definitely recommend focusing on them, especially when they spawn. In those electrified areas, you're not going to be able to jump, so that's important to note. And that can really affect if you're trying to move away from the boss, especially once you get him down into that 1/3 health range. But again, if you're consistent and you can pour the damage on pretty quickly, you actually get some small reprieves when the boss is not there, in between kind of the waves of enemies spawning, where you'll find some success and be able to clear out the ads, grab ammo, probably heal up. And as long as you and your fire team can do a good job of having a little bit of separation between you to allow some movement back and forth for revives, on top of just being consistent with damage and focusing on the additional enemies that are there, I don't think a good coordinated fire team at a decent power level is going to have too much problem with this raid. Like I said, 10 minutes going into it is definitely enough. I do fully believe with the right setups, having some folks with some slight class variations, as well as something that they're extremely comfortable with. I'm extremely comfortable personally playing as a striker, and I do get a good amount of damage in on this boss, especially when he comes into the melee portion, because he has to stay so close. I'm able to pop my super, get that ground AoE effect area damage, and really kind of pour it on him pretty good. But there's also some definite benefits to having the solar side of it with the hammer, because he was able obviously to deal some longer range damage, as well as focus on some additional adds on the side when the boss isn't up. Just as long as you have a good mix of that, just really like you would handle any other normal boss fight, I don't think most people will have too much trouble, as long as they understand and can figure out and feel comfortable with the sequence of dealing the boss the damage. He disappears, you get a wave of adds in, you kind of take care of those, pour your damage back into your boss, rinse and repeat. If you can do that, I don't think you'll have too many issues with this fight for the most part. Now again, I will say the biggest killers of time are going to be, obviously, if at any point the team dies. That's obviously a huge factor to take in. I think during this run, I don't think we had any point where the entire team actually did die. We did a pretty good job of keeping each other up. And the other nice thing is actually there is some benefit to having a person on the team go down, especially if they're low on health and you're just kind of struggling to stay alive. It's almost better if you can kind of coordinate it where you go down, you get somebody to revive you, and you come back in with health, and can kind of rinse and repeat and go from there. So that's really it. Just a quick guide, just kind of showing you through how we ended up handling it in the fire team of 3 for this new Nightfall strike. Again, I definitely recommend playthrough. Go get your Sturm if you haven't already, which you can do on Nessus. You just work through the missions. It is pretty long and exaggerated, so it will take you a little bit of time. Definitely a weapon worth going to get, but it'll also show you exactly how to move through this whole mission, so you'll really have a good understanding of what you need to do. I would be remiss again if I didn't mention, just like you saw there, the lightning grenades are absolutely brutal. You will see this boss, minus the part where he moves around a lot when he goes into his melee phase. You'll see the boss actually stand around quite a bit and actually absorb some damage. Here he's getting in his melee range, but you can see we've really done a pretty good damage, and you can kind of time your grenades as well with his melee too. And there you go. I ended up getting a pretty good loot drop from this. I did get that legendary piece of equipment, a couple rare pieces of equipment, obviously the tokens, and then one legendary engram. But even more important than that, I got myself my milestone for powerful gear, as you saw pop previously. So I ended up doing pretty good.
At least you got some loot.
Like I said, sitting on 277 right now for this raid just because of the weapon setups. I really do like my auto rifle that I have, but I ended up getting a pretty decent helmet that I was happy with, a little bit of light power there, and then the powerful equipment drop that I got ended up rewarding me both with an exotic piece of armor and a legendary piece of armor, which was absolutely huge. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this walkthrough. Hopefully the tips and everything was helpful for you. I know we sped through a little bit of it, but I didn't want to take too much of your time. So as always, thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with me today. Doc from Average Gamer, guys. Really do appreciate all the support to the channel. If it was helpful, let me know. Hit that thumbs up. Let me know in the comments down below, and look forward to hanging out with you in a future video. And we got a lot more Destiny 2 coming at you. So thanks for watching.